Nebraska congressman is fighting to prove his innocence and clear his name. First Alert 6 confirmed attorneys with Jeff Fortenberry filed a motion to delay his case in Washington, D.C.
Fortenberry's lawyers believe President-elect Trump's administration will make a different decision on his case based on campaign promises. The motion asks for a trial date in April. 2 years ago, Fortenberry resigned after he was found guilty of lying to the FBI about illegal campaign contributions. The Court of Appeals tossed his conviction in California, not because of the evidence, but because of where the trial was held.